Welcome to Coached Soul, a podcast for a better you. Your host, Steve Hudgens, is a licensed professional counselor, and your co-host, Julia Canton, is a therapeutic coach. Together, they discuss various topics, providing a different perspective on life and insight that you are not alone. On a non-emergency basis, you may contact them at area code 918-280-8690 or coachsoul.com to provide them with new topics, feedback, or to request an appearance on the show. And now, here's your host, Steve Hudgens.
Welcome back to the show. We're doing a pre-recording because this is going to be podcasted after my surgery. We're going to say that I made it through because if I didn't, Julia, my ghost would haunt you forever. It's just that kind of a spirit. No, I I made it through. We're going to have some positive attitude about this. I do want to pick up because I know the last session was rather heavy in dealing with our topic. One of the things I want to flush out that I find interesting that I think would help our listeners in listening to this podcast is you're dealt a blow. And for you were dealt with a blow 3 different times, and your emotions played it out different ways. The first time you had a disbelief, the second time you kind of stuffed it down, and then the third time you just became survival mode. And you didn't have time to prepare for any of that. But I knew at least 2 weeks in advance of when the surgery was going to happen. I knew that I kept you informed about where the doctor was at and what he was concerning. And we've had discussions, but I think it would be important to help our audience to kind of gather some facts here that what happens here I am, a reminder of your husband. Even though I'm not your husband, I'm a good friend, a close confidant, and just because we're in the field of in helping one another, helping other people, because that's who we are as people. How has just hearing about my heart condition, we know is going to do better for me because they say I'm in great health, which I am. My blood work shows that I'm in great health. I'm in good shape. I have good targets on my heart. They're impressed with it. So they have a positive attitude, which has given me positive hope, but there's still that runs that risk. How has my condition impacted you? And I know you said it's nothing to do with me personally. It's just a situation. And I like that you were able to process, because I think sometimes we need to process this out. It's not about the individual. It's what you've experienced in the past. Flush that out for us a little bit.
Well, I think that just as a reminder that surgeries, extensive surgeries on the body and heart, eyes that would restore vision to a couple of my kids and things along those lines were a part of the storyline, for Lee and I. And surgeries in and of itself is nothing new for me. And it's just that when I began to realize that, well, let me just go ahead and start with just a little bit of a background before I get into the impact that yours has had, is that Lee survived all 3 of those heart-related surgeries. Okay, and we're talking blown out valves and dissecting ascending and descending aortic arteries. These are major things, okay? And he survived all of those. And then he didn't survive. The last 4.5 months of his life was spent in the hospital because it took them about that long to discover that he had a disorder called histoplasmosis, which they call that the pigeon disease. It's just the pigeon poop has spores in it. If you're around it, you breathe them in. You don't know that they're in the air. They lay dormant. They get in the lungs. They lay dormant in the lungs until the immune system drops so low that they hatch and they take over the everything in the blood. There is no cure for it. There's suppressants, but there's no cure. And so by the time that they had discovered that he had this, we were at a place where he wasn't going to leave the hospital. If they gave him the medications to suppress the histoplasmosis, then they were so strong and toxic that it would kill him. If they didn't treat the histoplasmosis, then his heart would give out because his blood pressure could not sustain the rate and impact that this disorder was having on it. If they gave him the medication, he had a mechanical heart valve in it, and they would have to do another valve transplant because histoplasmosis, the medication would not kill what was in the valve itself. So if they didn't do that surgery, he would die. If they did the surgery, his body was too weak and he would die. There was no hope whatsoever, except that the one thing that they said is if we can get enough nutrition into his body through a feeding tube, we might be able to build up his strength, and he might be able to survive the surgery or something. But right now he's just too depleted. His body mass and everything had gone down so severely in the hospital. And of course, it was the one thing that he and I agreed that we would not do, is feeding tubes. And here I was left with this dilemma. Do I give him the only chance that the doctors are saying in which he will survive? And if I do, I'm going against everything that he had said that he didn't want. So I had to make a decision to go ahead and do the feeding tube. I discussed it with his siblings, and we said this. If he had hope, he would want the hope. We were talking, when we had those discussions about feeding tubes, we were talking car accidents, things along those lines. And so I chose to go ahead and do the feeding tube to give him that one last chance. And as it turns out, I went home with my children to stay with them, and his sister stayed with him in the hospital while they did the feeding tube. And the nurse that did it didn't follow hospital protocol to use an ultrasound machine because of all the other stuff that was going on and tubes and everything. And honestly, this is you might want to make sure the listeners are aware, but it's very graphic. The feeding tube was put in his lungs instead of down in his stomach, and she drowned him. He literally bled out. She punctured his lungs. For some people, they go, "Why didn't you sue?" And I said, because in some odd way, that was a mercy death. He wasn't going to leave that hospital. That last chance was his last chance. Was she in the wrong? Yes, no question on that. But he was so, so sick. And the likelihood that the feeding tube would have even worked was so small that it wouldn't have mattered. My only sorrow was that it caused pain in the end. And
so you have all this trauma
yeah,
that you have dealt with. And
yes,
so
years and years of it work.
I mean, that, not to cause more trauma, but I was told of what they're going to do,
Yes.
the incubation and the tubes that are coming out to alert my family and friends that I may look that bad in bed when I come out of ICU.
Right.
But it's necessary to sustain my life until I'm able to do things on my own. And knowing me, I am that self-willed, power, independent guy that I am going to get through, and being a veteran, I am thankful for the Veterans Administration to allow me to have this outside of the VA at OSU Medical Center in Tulsa. So I'm thankful. But even as a veteran, we get trained for war. We get trained for the what if scenarios. But nothing like this prepares us. Yes, I'm preparing for this surgery and I'm given time and I'm very fortunate. But Julia, what, we to resurface when we first started this podcast, what is it that we can help our listeners in preparing for, either we're preparing or the unprepared, what helps us to get
Well,
through the difficulty? Because you said that this has impacted you to a way
yeah.
that
Well, and I
you
want to
start to
answer that
disengage.
question too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and because there was a process after Lee passed away that I did numb out. I couldn't be angry, I couldn't be sad. I just started numbing out, and because I had to cope with life, we still had to survive, and so moving forward after years and years of work, because he's been gone for 8 years, and of course, taking all the coursework that I did in the clinical mental health program at OU, and just all these, they make you do your work, while you're in those kinds of programs, and it was interesting that and wasn't aware of it. I like the word processing versus coping, by the way. I wasn't aware that I was automatically processing with old dialogues. When you said that your surgery was coming up, I started feeling this withdrawal from you, and it wasn't a conscious thing. It was just, I don't want to do the podcast with him. I don't want to have conversations. I want to pretend that this is not going to happen. I am, these are literally expressions that are going on in the backdrop of my mind. Okay. And then it was literally a couple of days ago that I went, oh, Julia, the awareness, the conscious awareness of avoidance is what prompted me to realize that was not our common theme, to want to avoid you. So where's that avoidance coming from?
Mm.
I enjoy the podcast, but why am I wanting to resist doing it? Why am I wanting to electively put a stop to it now? Okay. Versus
Sure.
seeing what the outcome will be. And then that brought about a whole internal conversation of really what is going on. And really what was going on is that my brain said, hey, Steve's heart surgery situation, somebody you care about, is very, very, to my nervous system, is the same as what's gone over here with Lee. Even though they have nothing to do with each other,
Right.
even though they are completely different surgeries, even though they are you're very much aware of what's going to go step by step in your process, and mine, we didn't have very much information or time, even though, okay, I love those words, my brain said, guess what, it's the same, so we're going to react the very same. And how you survive in these situations is you disengage, you go numb, you disconnect, you stay away from them, because if you stay away from them, then you don't have to deal with the potential aftermath, because we can survive that. We can survive that. And then, of course, if something, as we know, we're recording this as though you did great and everything's fantastic, but if he should have passed, then you can handle that because you've done that before. You know how to do that before. And so I thought, instead of avoiding this anymore, I wanted to have this conversation with you, have this conversation with our listeners, that we process grief in different ways and in different stages. But sometimes, even if we've done work, years and years and years of work, and we have the education and we have the experiences, sometimes grief comes up behind us and gives us a back slap up against the head and says, guess what? I'm taking over right now. Boom, without any warning. And
I
that,
just,
so,
I appreciate your honesty. I appreciate you being vulnerable. And this is what this podcast is about, is
mhm,
exposing vulnerability. It doesn't change how I feel about you. It doesn't change how you feel about me.
correct.
And if we can take that information and help other people to realize it just doesn't change, we can always come out better on the other side. And so I hear what you're wanting to do in disengaging. I also want to kind of reveal, what does that do to the person that's going through the event?
Hmm.
If
Hmm.
you weren't, um, I, I was wondering what was happening. And it's like, okay, are these, is she come up with excuses? Is she something else going on? And here I'm coming to the S day, surgery day, not D day. I don't want to call it death day.
Mhm.
It is surgery day. Okay.
Like the wording
And
there. It's very good.
right. And again, this is pre-recorded for our audience. And so
Yeah,
here's where
yeah.
I'm going with this. No matter the difficulty of life, and this is hard, we have to celebrate life as it is, that's been given to us because it's a gift. That's why it's called the present. The present is a gift in the moment. And it's so easy to succumb to the negative. It's so easy to get down and numb feelings out and just stay there. And what's harder is to celebrate life.
Mhm.
I want to be surrounded by my friends and family. Some of my clients, hey, can we come visit you? I don't care. If that's what you want to do, come visit. We're human beings. I think we come from a human decency between everybody that life needs to be celebrated.
Yes, and I think too, because I'd like to interject on that part.
Sure.
I think that part of the celebration is being able to trust each other with the vulnerabilities, with the rawness of expression of really what's going on. In our particular case, if we didn't have a friendship that would host a safe space for what's showing up, we wouldn't be having this conversation. And most certainly wouldn't be recording it. And so I think that just on that note alone is a reason to celebrate. It's really a reason to rejoice, because how much of our life do we spend in just trying to meet expectations,
Right.
trying to cover up, trying to suppress, when in fact we just need to be present for. And, you know, that is the beauty of this. I mean, yes, there's a celebration in the connection. And so that's where I'm just so grateful. I mean, it is a it's just the rawness and the beauty that this produces. So
I,
yeah.
I want to I want to pull out what you just said about being in a safe place, the vulnerability.
Mhm.
And when you think about dealing with grief, sometimes we want to shut down. We want to be inclusive. We want to say, okay, the world's coming crashing down. I don't want to deal with it. That can be destructive. And at the same time, we need to be mindful that when we can, it's about those healthy emotional boundaries of knowing who can handle and who can't handle. So I'd call it the model of relationships is like a bullseye. The bigger the bullseye, it's the acquaintances that I have, and as my bullseye gets closer, my inner circle is what's intimate for me, whether it's physical, emotional, spiritual, intellectual. It's that who I have in that inner circle that I love and trust the
Mhm.
most. Then outside of that one circle, there's my good friends that I have. So when we talk about safe space, we're going to have these Karens out there that are Debbie Downers, and whoever came up with these names, I don't know. I'm just glad they didn't say Steve or Julia and just put some negative connotation to our names. It's just it's hard to deal with as it is. But where I'm going with this is if we can just be able to process, and that's what I explain to a lot of my clients. Journal. It is an easy process when you journal. And I was talking to a client the other day who's an EMT. And one of the things that we talked about, she knew the lady that died. And it impacted her, and it impacted her in such a way that she knew the lady that died also had a small child. And that impacted her because she's a mother of small kids.
Mm-hmm.
And who do you talk to in the moment? And communication is very it's very important to be able to communicate our thoughts and feelings and emotions. And when you coming to me and say, Steve, I'm disengaging because of this. Okay, I respect that. And it took time for you to process. And I'm like, okay, what is it? And after explaining and talking and processing, how are you feeling now and exposing and being vulnerable? What are your feelings?
Well, I think that one, not everything is based on how we don't have a right just to react to life just because we feel a certain way.
There you go.
Um, you know, it's a, I I have a thorough appreciation for my emotional state, but I also understand that sometimes we have to take steps in a different direction from the way we feel about, on how
Mm.
based on opposite of what we feel even. And so I think that if I were to give it a single answer, I would simply state that there's an authenticity feeling by simply sharing, this is where I'm at. It doesn't mean that I have to be more present or that I have to be more involved. I can choose to simply stay where I'm at because I pulled back a little bit and be okay with that. Or I can choose to go forward. But going further back is not, I know that that's not who I am or what I want. So I'm not going to be trying to go that direction. But there is at least an honesty and that is present, at least from my, because I've stated it, and this is why I'm here, and I think that lends itself to a sense of just gratitude. Now you can choose, Steve can choose to take that information, but I've been honest in my stance, and I think that that's a beautiful space for me. And so, whereas before, there was kind of almost a sense of guilt or shame over, gosh, I don't know how, I don't know how to present this to him. I don't know how
Mm.
to, and again, it wasn't a conscious thing. It was just all these different emotions were showing up, and I was going, where's this coming from? What is this? Kind of thing. And then when I dissected it, and took it apart, and that's when I realized that I just got to be honest with him. I have to share with him what's really going on so that he understands that it has nothing to do with him. It is simply the way my nervous system is reacting because my brain thinks it's the same thing. It's not. And eventually it'll learn that. But it is better to just show up and say, here's authentically where I'm at. And this is what I can give, and this is how I can be present in this way. The other way isn't going to work for a little bit. Let me process some more, and then we can talk about it again. It's just for me, it's a good space.
I
It's a
appreciate that because on the flip side, too, I'm the receiver. And I
Mhm.
could react out of my own hurt and push you away because of rejection or a
Mhm.
feeling of abandonment. So when we
Yes.
deal with these things, I think that we have to create a safe space for each other and understand that we're human and we have these emotions,
Hmm.
and it has nothing to do with you personally or with me personally. So when we hit tragedies or when we hit some type of trauma and we're feeling these things, a good way, and I don't like the word cope, it's just and for the life of me, I can't think of a different term. But if we
Yeah,
can
just call it
create,
process through it.
yeah, just processing through it is healthy. And even though our conversation can be difficult, it gives a sense of accomplishment, of overcoming an obstacle and feeling good on the other side. that I give you the room to breathe. I accept where you're at and understanding, okay, I can be selfish in mine and have my own pity party, but I'm all about living a life of regrets and sorrows and depression and things of that nature. We're missing out of the beauty that's there of just the breath and the air that we breathe. And I'm thankful to be alive. We're out of time. And I really appreciate this conversation that we have had. And I hope to our audience, it has broadened that perspective of understanding that here's how we have a difficult conversation. And I will say this was not a rehearsed recording at all between us. This was a spontaneous conversation, one that we wanted to be vulnerable, one that we wanted to be honest with you, unscripted, unrehearsed. You have the natural us to help encourage you, the listener, how to be a better you. And as always, may you be blessed. Thanks, Julia.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks for joining us today. We hope to have you back next week. Until then, be safe and be kind.